Snow whispered across the pines like a prayer, soft and ceaseless, blurring the line between earth and sky. In that pale quiet, a husky moved like smoke, fleet-footed, silver-backed, a ghost slipping through winter's hush. Behind him, Micah Callan came, boots crunching through a foot of drift, rifle slung across his shoulder, breath steaming slow and steady. He wasn't hunting game so much as solitude. Always had been. Since the war. Since the fire. Since he stopped calling any place home. The trail he followed curved along a frozen creek bed, half buried under ice so thin it sang beneath his weight. His husky, Aspen, paused now and again, snout raised, ears pricked. The dog had a way of hearing things Micah couldn't. Sorrow. Storms. Souls in the snow. Micah scratched his beard absently, eyes scanning the tree line. No deer prints, no rabbit runs. Only the clean, unmarked stillness of a world asleep under frost. He didn't mind. Silence was its own kind of company, and he'd long since learned to live with ghosts. Aspen stopped. Hackles lifted. His breath curled like smoke, and he let out a low, guttural whine. "What is it, boy?" The husky took off like a shot. Micah swore under his breath and followed, breaking into a slow, cautious run. The land dipped toward a hollow where the trees thinned and the creek widened into a half-frozen lake, wind-skinned and glass-bright. Aspen's paws skidded across the edge. He barked. Desperate. Urgent. Then Micah saw it. A wrecked sled, torn leather traces tangled in the reeds. The carcass of a horse nearby, legs stiff, eyes open to the sky. And beyond it, under a collapsing sheet of ice, movement. Micah dropped his rifle, slid down the embankment. His heart slammed against his ribs as he saw her, a woman, soaked and half-submerged, arms straining to keep two children afloat. Their faces were pale, their cries strangled by shock and cold. One of the girls, older, maybe 8 or 9, was limp in her mother's grasp. Without thinking, Micah crashed into the water. The cold hit like a hammer, shattering breath from his lungs, but he pushed forward, broke the ice with his forearm, reached for the mother first. Her skin was gray-blue, fingers cut and bleeding from clawing at the ice. "I've got you," he rasped. She didn't answer, just shoved the older girl toward him with the last of her strength. Aspen barked wildly from shore, pacing back and forth. Micah hauled the girl into his arm, then the younger one, teeth chattering as he felt his muscles stiffen. Last, the woman. He wrapped her in one arm, held all three against him, and staggered back toward land. The ice cracked under every step. It groaned like something dying. By the time they reached the bank, he could barely feel his limbs. He laid them gently in the snow, brushing hair from their faces. The older child was breathing, just barely. The younger whimpered once, then buried her face in his coat. The woman's eyes fluttered open, clouded, frantic. "You're all right," Micah murmured. "You're safe now." She tried to speak. Her lips trembled too hard. But she touched his face, and then whispered a name that stopped his heart cold. "Micah." He stared down at her, stunned. She didn't look like anyone he knew, thin, face hollowed by hunger and fear, but the way she said it was more than memory. It was recognition. Then her head lolled, and she collapsed into unconsciousness. The trail back to his cabin was long, and the weight in his arms heavier than the years he carried, but Micah never faltered. Aspen led the way, his eyes glancing back often, tail low, anxious. Snow thickened as they climbed the ridge, coating the woman's hair like a shroud. Micah's breath burned his throat. His coat was soaked. The girls clung to him, shivering in silence. His cabin came into view as dusk fell, logs dark and weathered, smoke still curling from the chimney like a lifeline. Inside, the fire was low but waiting. Micah kicked the door open with a grunt and carried the three of them in, one by one, laying them near the hearth. He wrapped them in every blanket he owned, stoked the flames, and stripped off his wet coat. His hands shook as he poured warm broth into tin cups. The younger girl blinked up at him as he pressed one to her lips. "Drink slow now," he said, voice roughened by cold and awe. She obeyed without question, her fingers clutching his like a lifeline. The older girl stirred but didn't speak. The woman, the one who'd spoken his name, remained still, her breathing shallow, lips tinged blue. Micah knelt beside her, brushed wet strands of hair from her cheek, and studied her face. She was beautiful in a way that hardship had not erased. Her cheekbones were sharp, her skin fair, freckled faintly, and there was a strength in the set of her brow, even unconscious. Something about her face pulled at the edges of memory. But the name she'd said, his name, how would she know it? He rose and found dry clothes, bundled her gently, checked her pulse, slow but steady. He sat by the fire all night, watching the shadows move across their faces. Aspen lay beside the girls, warm and quiet, never once taking his eyes off the woman. Morning came pale and bruised, light leaking through the frost-covered window panes. The fire had burned low, and the air was brittle with cold. Micah stirred the embers, added wood, and ladled more broth into a pan. The scent rose, slow and savory. As it did, the woman stirred. Her eyes opened, startled, panicked. She tried to sit up. "Easy," Micah said gently, moving to her side. "You're safe." She blinked, eyes focusing. "The girls. They're all right. Warm. Sleeping. You've been out a day." Her lips parted. "I remember water. Then you. You were drowning." She stared at him. Then softer. "I said your name." "You did. I don't know why." Micah nodded, his chest tightening. "You know me." I don't think so." She frowned. "Do you know me?" He hesitated. "No," he lied. But something inside him whispered otherwise. She looked at the girls, curled together beneath furs. Her face crumpled, and tears leaked down her cheeks, hot and silent. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't—" "Don't," he said. "You would have done the same." She said nothing more. Just watched the fire, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket like a lifeline. That day passed in slow rhythm. Micah gave them food, space, warmth. The younger girl, with dark curls and a curious mind, began to speak. Her name was Junie. The older one, Wren, was quieter, watchful. She limped slightly, though she didn't complain. The woman offered her name late in the afternoon, spoken with quiet hesitation. Stella. He tasted the name in his mind. It fit, like a forgotten tune remembered only when sung. She didn't explain where they'd come from, not yet. But he didn't ask. He'd learned not to pry. Some stories unravel better in their own time. That night, he sat on the porch while snow drifted down in slow spirals. Aspen lay beside him, head on his paws. "She knew my name," Micah murmured to the dog. "Before I said a word." Aspen whined low. Micah watched the dark horizon, his breath curling upward like smoke. A long time ago, when he was no older than Wren, he'd been starving on the edge of a town he no longer remembered the name of. A girl had come outside a bakery with a heel of bread. Said nothing. Just offered it to him, eyes wide and solemn. Her hair had been braided, like Stella's was now. He hadn't remembered that moment in years. Not until today. Not until she whispered Micah like it had always belonged to her. He stood, pulled his coat tighter, and looked back into the glow of the cabin. Inside, 3 strangers slept beneath his roof. But somehow, for the first time in a long while, Micah Callan didn't feel alone. And far off in the trees, the ice whispered again, as if something beneath it was still trying to surface. The wind had softened, as though winter had drawn a breath and held it. Snow still fell, but gentle now, drifting, not driving. Inside the cabin, the fire gave off a steady hush and glow, licking shadows across rough-hewn walls. A pot of lentils simmered. The scent filled the small room with the quiet kind of comfort one doesn't recognize until it's needed most. Micah sat by the hearth, sharpening a knife in slow strokes, his boots drying nearby. Aspen lay curled at the base of the girl's bedding, his warm body forming a border between them and the cold floor. Junie had wrapped her small arms around his neck, still asleep. Wren stirred fitfully, her brow twitching at some dream she couldn't shake. Stella stood near the window, shoulders hunched. Micah had offered her his spare shirt and woolen trousers, cinched with rope at the waist. They swallowed her slight frame, but she didn't complain. She hadn't said much at all since waking again. Her fingers moved across the glass where frost feathered into delicate spirals. "You've a place to go?" Micah asked, voice low so as not to wake the girls. She didn't turn. "There was a claim. My husband's brother said it might still be mine. Some miles north of Silver Point. But the trail was longer than he said. The map he gave me, it was wrong." "You rode alone?" "No choice. Jeb sent the girls and me off after the burial. Said it was better we find something of our own." Micah said nothing for a moment. He set the knife down. "The man who sent you off, was he kin to your husband?" She gave a faint nod. "And the man himself?" "Your husband. Dead near 6 months now. Mine cave-in." She said it without bitterness, without softness, like someone folding a memory she no longer had the strength to carry. Her eyes remained fixed on the frost, but her voice drifted toward him now like smoke from a fire nearly out. "He changed in the end. Work made him hard. There wasn't room for softness anymore. Not even for the girls. I tried to stay until he was gone." Micah didn't offer pity. He only added wood to the fire. The room crackled, brightened. He handed her a tin mug of tea. "You won't reach Silver Point until thaw," he said. "You're welcome to stay. Until the road's passable." Her eyes flicked toward him, cautious, measuring. "I'm not asking for anything in return," he added, voice rough as bark. "And I won't hold you longer than you want to be held." Something softened in her face then. Not trust, not yet, but a kind of loosening. She took the mug. "I'll help where I can," she said. "I imagine you will." That night, the girls ate 2 full bowls each, their color returning. Wren's voice remained quiet, her gaze sharp, always watching Stella as though to take cues for how safe they were. Junie chattered in fits, mostly nonsense, delighted observations, questions for the dog, silly songs sung under her breath. Micah listened without interrupting. He'd never had children of his own. Never imagined himself the sort who might. But the way Junie tucked her feet under her as she sat, the way Wren picked vegetables from her soup in perfect silence, it stirred something unfamiliar and warm in him, something he hadn't named in years. After the girls curled under the quilts, Stella remained near the fire, nursing her tea. Her fingers had stopped trembling. "You've lived here long?" she asked. 4 winters now." "Why?" "Because people don't come here often. And I've learned I do better when they don't." She considered that. "Not anymore, I suppose." Micah cracked the smallest smile. "A dog makes a poor doorman." She smiled back, faint, lopsided, but real. The first he'd seen. "I never had a dog," she said. "My husband said animals made children too soft." Micah looked at Aspen, who had positioned himself so both girls were within reach of his paws. "I'd argue softness might be what saves us." Stella lowered her gaze. "You talk like a man who used to believe something else." "I did." He said no more, and she didn't ask. They sat like that for a long while, the fire spitting softly, the world outside gone utterly white. In the following days, Stella moved like someone trying not to take up space. She rose before the girls, swept ashes, folded blankets, mended torn sleeves with the calm economy of a woman long used to doing much with little. She asked no permission, only worked. And Micah let her. The girls began to stir differently. Less fear, more play. Junie followed Aspen outside, bundled like a turnip, delighting in tracking the Husky's prints. Wren stayed close to the cabin but began to watch Micah, not with suspicion anymore, but study. He taught her to split kindling. She never smiled, but her movements grew sure. Micah kept his distance at first, unsure how to step around the silent grief the 3 of them carried. But each night, Stella sat a little nearer the fire, spoke a little more, told stories sometimes, soft ones, from her girlhood, about wildflowers and willow branches. about quilting bees and old summer fairs. One evening, when snow battered the windows like waves against stone, she hummed. It was an old song, half forgotten, and her voice was rough from disuse. But the tune stirred something in Micah's chest he hadn't felt in decades. He watched her fingers as she sewed a patch on Wren's coat, her braid falling loose over her shoulder. He remembered a girl with that same braid once, a bakery doorway, a heel of bread, eyes filled with something unnameable. He said nothing. Not yet. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Stella stood near the fire, looking down at Aspen. "Why does he trust them so quickly?" she asked. "Children, I mean. He knows what's worth protecting." Stella knelt and scratched behind Aspen's ears. The husky leaned into her touch with a sigh. "I don't remember saying your name," she said quietly. "You did. But I didn't recognize you." "That happens sometimes," Micah said. "The mind forgets what the soul remembers." She looked up, startled. "That sounds like something a preacher would say." He chuckled under his breath. "I've read too much, maybe. I didn't think men like you read at all. I didn't used to. But after the war, I found words quieter than guns." Silence hung between them, filled only by the snapping of firewood. "Thank you," she said after a moment, "for saving us. But more than that, for letting us stay." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You're not a burden." She stood, pulling her shawl closer. "I don't know how long we'll stay, but I don't dread waking up anymore. That's new." Micah looked at her, then at the girls sleeping near Aspen. The cabin, once echoing with emptiness, now hummed with breath, with fire, with fragile ordinary life. "You're welcome here," he said. "As long as you need." She nodded, then turned in. Her steps were quiet, but no longer uncertain. Micah sat by the fire a while longer, sharpening his knife again, though it didn't need it. Outside, the wind had died down. Stars peeked through a thinning sky. The forest beyond remained silent. But something inside the cabin had changed. And though he wouldn't name it yet, not even in his own mind, Micah felt it in the warmth that lingered after she left the room. Not love. Not yet. But the space where it might someday grow. The thaw came slowly, like forgiveness. Each day, the snow softened at the edges, the icicles dripping like a ticking clock. The lake, once sealed in silence, began to murmur. Thin veins of dark water appeared along its surface, cracking open the white crust as though winter itself was exhaling. Micah noticed it first from the ridge, where he often stood at dawn. It was a habit he hadn't broken even with a full cabin. There was peace in that solitude, in the sting of wind against his face, in watching the husky below trace patterns through the snow. Aspen no longer ran ahead as he used to, not as far. He circled back often now, always aware of the three waiting behind. Back at the cabin, Wren stood by the fire reading aloud from an old almanac, her voice flat but careful. Junie built a fort of pine cones and firewood chunks, Aspen patiently allowing her to balance a ragged kerchief on his head. Stella moved through the space with quiet grace, her presence now woven into the wood and warmth like she'd always belonged. She was laughing more. Not the full kind, not yet. But sometimes, when Micah said something dry, her eyes lit and the sound slipped out of her before she could catch it. He didn't try to summon it too often. It came best when left to bloom on its own. He found himself watching her hands often. The way her fingers folded laundry, stirred stew, brushed Wren's hair. He'd begun to recall, in clearer pieces, that moment from long ago, the girl with the braid and the piece of bread offered in silence. He had been little more than bone then, straggling along the edge of a town too broken to welcome strangers. Her hand had been small but steady, and the way she'd looked at him, pitiless, unafraid, had stayed with him longer than any sermon or gunfire. Micah hadn't told her yet. He wasn't sure he would. Maybe it was enough to remember. But sometimes, when Stella sat outside with the girls, face tilted toward a sky turning bluer by the hour, he wondered if some part of her remembered too. The afternoon light had the quality of smoke, gold-touched and slow-moving, when Stella asked, "Did you fight in the war?" Micah looked up from his carving, He was shaping a small horse for Junie's collection, though she didn't know it yet. I did. She didn't press, only nodded, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. Then, after a beat, blue or gray? Blue. Stella nodded again, slower this time. My husband wore gray. He didn't fight, but his brother did. Came back with less kindness than he left with. Micah didn't answer at first. The knife paused in his hand. There was no kindness where I went, he said eventually. Only mud and blood and boys who died before they learned how to live. Did it change you? He looked at her then, long and quiet. I used to think it did, he said. But now I think it just showed me who I already was. She didn't speak, but her eyes held his. And in that look, something passed between them, unspoken, tender, as delicate as breath on cold glass. That night, the wind howled again. Spring might be coming, but winter hadn't left yet. The lake roared with its own voice under the ice, deep and groaning. Stella tossed in her bedroll. Wren muttered in her sleep. Micah lay awake by the fire, Aspen dozing at his side. He heard movement. Stella stood at the window, wrapped in a shawl, watching the trees. Trouble? Micah asked, rising without startling her. No, she said. Just dreaming with my eyes open. He joined her. The moon had risen, full and high, casting silver across the field. The lake in the distance looked like a broken mirror. I remembered something, she said. From when I was little. Before the war. Micah waited. There was this boy. Dirty. Starving. He wandered through the alley behind my mother's bakery. I was maybe 8. I gave him the last piece of heel bread from that morning. She scolded me for it later, said never to feed someone who might come back angry. Micah's breath caught. I don't remember his name. I don't even know if he spoke. But his eyes were the saddest thing I'd ever seen. And the most alive. I remember him, he said quietly. She looked at him sharply. That boy, he said. He never forgot you. Stella turned to him fully, her expression unreadable. The fire behind them flickered low, casting a gold edge to the silver light from outside. I didn't realize it was you, she said, voice smaller now. I didn't expect you to. She wrapped her arms around herself. Her breath shook as she exhaled. I never thought that piece of bread mattered. It mattered more than anything, he said. It was the first time I believed someone might see me as something other than trouble. She closed her eyes. I don't know who I was then. You were kind, he said. Even if you didn't know it. A long silence. I didn't remember your face, she said. But when I saw you in the water, I said your name. I don't know how. Maybe something deeper remembered. She looked down. Does that mean something? He hesitated, then answered, I don't know yet. Maybe it just means we were meant to cross paths again. Stella didn't speak, but her hand brushed his as she turned back to the window. Her fingers barely touched his knuckles. It was nothing and everything at once. They stood there until the fire went to coals and the moon began to dip. Over the next days, something shifted between them. Not in grand gestures. In the quiet spaces. She began humming again, more often. He told her the names of the trees, pointed out tracks in the snow. Wren asked him one morning if he'd ever been a teacher. He only smiled. Micah showed Junie how to whittle a stick into the shape of a bird. She beamed with pride and named it Thistle. Stella said it was the first time she'd seen Junie keep still for longer than 5 minutes. He watched them grow stronger. Health returned to their cheeks. Wren started reading from his old books, asking questions about words Micah thought had long since gone unused. Stella helped him mend the barn roof after a late storm tore 2 shingles loose. She didn't ask for instruction. She climbed and worked beside him until the job was done. When the snow finally cleared enough for a walk to town, Micah made the journey alone. He brought back flour, lard, a small bag of peppermints for the girls. He also returned with news. "There's word of a man asking around," he told Stella that evening. "Looking for a woman traveling with 2 children. Said he was kin." Her face tightened. "His name?" "Didn't say. Just left coin at the saloon to send word if anyone saw you." Stella went still. "I didn't take anything from him," she said. "Just the sled. The horse was mine. The land too, if you count words on paper and not lies in a voice. I'm not saying he's coming, but we ought to be ready if he does." She nodded. Her fingers curled into fists. "He'll want to take us back. Say it's safer. Say I owe him." "You don't owe him a damn thing." "I know. But that doesn't mean he won't try." Micah nodded. "Then he'll find a different woman than the one he thought he sent into the wild." Stella looked at him. Her eyes glinted, not with fear, but with fire. "He won't take the girls," she said. "No," Micah agreed. "He won't." That night, Stella stood closer to him than she had before. Her shoulder brushed his. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but sure. "I don't want to forget this." "You won't," he said. "It's in you now. I'm not just surviving anymore." He didn't answer. Just took her hand. Held it like it was something precious he'd almost lost. They stood that way for a long time. Outside, the lake had begun to sing again, its surface cracking open beneath the press of the warming sky. And deep beneath that ice, the truth waited, no longer buried, no longer frozen. Just waiting to rise. Spring had only just arrived, but the woods still remembered winter. Though sunlight filtered through the pine canopy, warming patches of thawed ground, ice clung stubbornly to the lake's edge and lay hidden in the shaded soil. The snow no longer blanketed the world, but it still whispered beneath boots and paws, a fragile crust giving way to the season's slow insistence. Birdsong returned in hesitant flurries, as if nature wasn't sure it was safe to breathe again. Micah had begun chopping logs in the early hours, sleeves rolled to the elbow, rhythm steady. Stella watched from the porch, her hands wrapped around a tin of coffee. Her girls were in the garden bed they'd started near the shed, Junie planting marigolds with clumsy delight, Wren sketching their outlines in the dirt with her finger. Aspen lay in the grass nearby, half asleep, ears twitching now and then at some distant noise. They'd settled into a rhythm Micah hadn't known he'd needed. It was quiet, yes, but not the hollow silence of his life before. It was full now, of breath, of voices, of warmth. He could mark time by the way Stella tied her hair, by the cadence of Wren's reading, by the joy Junie took in discovering worms. He no longer counted his days by the stretch of snowfall or the kill of the trapline. He counted them by laughter, by firelight, by the nearness of something that felt a lot like hope. So when Aspen rose, stiff-backed and growling low, Micah knew something had shifted in the woods. Stella looked at him, alert. Wren stood slowly. Junie stopped her planting and moved toward the porch. Micah set the axe down, wiped his hands on his pants, and followed the dog's line of sight. There was a man coming through the trees. On foot, broad-shouldered, with a gray duster and a slouch hat pulled low. He walked like a man who'd spent too much time in saddles and saloons, heavy in the hips, sure-footed on unstable ground. He carried himself with the lazy authority of someone used to being feared. Micah stepped off the porch and met him halfway. "Afternoon," the man drawled, voice smooth as worn leather. "Depends on what you're here for," Micah replied. The man grinned, not kindly. "Just lookin' for someone. Name's Hartley. Jeb Hartley." Micah didn't blink. "You're late." Jeb raised a brow. "That so? I heard about you in town. Heard you were asking." "Well, I like to be thorough," Jeb said, eyes scanning past Micah toward the cabin. "Woman come through here with a couple of girls? Be about—" He mimed a height with his hand. "One shy, one sharp, and a mother with hair like spilled whiskey. She's not taking visitors." "I ain't visiting," Jeb said, all trace of charm disappearing. "I'm here for family. She's not yours to claim." Jeb chuckled. "I reckon the law might say different." "Then go get the law," Micah said, stepping forward slightly. But you won't find it out here. Jeb's mouth curved, but his eyes stayed cold. Funny. That's what your kind always says, right before someone gets hurt. Micah didn't move, didn't reach for the rifle slung at the porch rail. He didn't need to. His stillness spoke enough. Behind him, Aspen growled low. Jeb held up a hand like he meant peace. Look, I ain't lookin' to stir trouble. But that woman's got something that belongs to me. A deed. A claim. My brother, bless his bones, left it behind without proper sorting. She's confused. I'm here to clarify things. She's got clarity just fine, Micah said. You need to leave. I'll give her a day, Jeb said, backing off a few steps. To get her mind right. After that, I come back with more than words. He turned without another glance, fading into the trees like smoke. Micah didn't speak as he walked back to the porch. Stella stood, unmoving, her face pale but steady. Jeb? She asked. Micah nodded. He wants the deed. He wants control, she murmured. He always has. You didn't tell me he was your husband's brother. I didn't think I had to. I hoped, we'd lost him in the storm. Micah studied her face. He's not gone yet. No, she said. He's the kind of man who finds his way back no matter how many doors you close. Wren stepped forward, taking Stella's hand. We're not going anywhere, Mama. Stella looked down at her daughter, and something flickered across her face. Pain, pride, a deep-set fear she hadn't spoken aloud. We're not, Micah said, quiet but certain. You've got a place here. She nodded, but her eyes were far off. That night, Stella sat by the fire long after the girls had gone to sleep. Micah brought her a mug, sat across from her, and let the silence settle. He tried to buy it, she said eventually. After Owen died. Said the mine deed was no good without his say-so. Said I'd be better off letting him handle the claim. I told him no. He told me I'd come crawling back. You won't, Micah said. Stella shook her head. He's not used to hearing no from women. Not without punishment. Micah looked into the flames. I've known men like that. They don't understand what to do when they run out of fists. He'll bring someone with him next time. He always finds men who want easy coin. Then I'll be ready. She looked at him, something hard and trembling behind her eyes. You could send us away. Say it's not your fight. It became mine the day you whispered my name under ice. She exhaled slowly. You always talk like that? Only when it matters. He leaned forward, hands folded, elbows on knees. You don't have to fight him alone. You've got people now. She nodded, eyes shimmering. Thank you, she whispered. For staying? He asked. For seeing me. The next day, they prepared, not for war, but for defense. Micah checked the cabin's locks, walked the edge of the land with Aspen, scanned the forest for paths a man might use on horseback. He showed Wren where to hide if something happened. Junie, too young to understand, practiced tying knots with bits of string Stella had given her. They didn't talk about fear, not directly, but it hummed underneath their chores, steady and sharp. That afternoon, Stella asked to practice shooting. Micah hesitated only a moment, then brought her to the clearing behind the barn. Gave her the old revolver he'd kept from the war. Her hands shook at first, but her eyes were steady. She missed the first 2 shots. Then she found the rhythm. The sound cracked the air like branches breaking under frost. She'll hear it, she said when they stopped. He'll hear it too. Good, Micah replied. When night fell, no one slept easily. Aspen paced. Wren stayed beside her mother, and Junie curled up in the crook of Stella's arm, dreaming of simpler things. Micah sat by the door with the rifle in his lap, heart steady but alert. Jeb returned in the morning. He came with another man, taller, younger, mean-eyed and leather-jacketed. Both wore guns. They didn't come sneaking. They rode in bold, loud, the way men do when they think the sight of them is enough to earn surrender. Micah stepped out to meet them. "Morning, neighbor," Jeb called, dismounting. "Hope you slept well." "Better than you're about to," Micah said calmly. The younger man chuckled. "He's got bark." "He's got more than that," Stella said, appearing behind Micah, rifle in her hands. Her voice was iron. Wren and Junie watched from the window. "You gonna point that at family?" Jeb asked. "You're not family," Stella said. "You're rot in my past." Jeb stepped closer. "That land belongs to my blood." "No," she said. "It belongs to Owen. And what little good was in him died before he did." Jeb's eyes darkened. "You think I won't take it by force?" "I think you'll try," Micah said. "But you'll regret it." The younger man moved, quick. His hand twitched toward his sidearm. Aspen barked, lunging. Micah stepped forward. Stella raised her rifle. And then a voice rang out from the woods. "That's enough." From the pines emerged a figure in a brown coat, badge glinting beneath it. Sheriff David. Old, tall, wiry. Known to both men and time. "Micah," he said. "Got word in town about trouble out here." Micah nodded. "Right on time." David looked to Jeb. "You threatening this family?" "No law says I can't speak my claim. But the law sure says you can't draw on them." David turned to Stella. "You all right, ma'am?" "I am now." The sheriff looked between them. "Jeb Hartley, you've got one warning. Leave this land. Don't come back." Jeb sneered but didn't argue. He turned, spat in the dirt, and mounted up. The younger man followed, sullen. As they rode away, the air loosened its hold. Birds returned to song. Aspen sat again, breathing steady. Micah looked at Stella. She didn't cry. She just stood tall, the rifle still in her hands, her daughters behind her, and the woods wide open ahead. "Thank you," she said again, voice steady now. Micah stepped beside her. "You never needed saving," he said. "Only someone to stand with you." She took his hand then, without hesitation. The storm had passed. But the story was far from over. Dawn stirred the world with a gentle touch, brushing the horizon with gold and smoke. The trees stood solemn in the hush, limbs stretching as if waking from deep sleep. Mist rose from the lake in curling ribbons, soft and uncertain, as if the water hadn't yet decided whether to dream or remember. Inside the cabin, the hearth glowed with the warmth of a fire that had never gone out. Stella moved quietly, braiding Junie's hair while Wren packed dried apples into a small sack. Their motions were calm, practiced, but the air held tension, stretched thin like the surface of thawing ice. Micah stood outside, sharpening his hatchet with slow, steady strokes. His breath curled in front of him, less from cold now than from the weight of decisions. The danger had passed, but not the reckoning. Jeb had left, sure, but men like him rarely surrendered their sense of ownership so easily. Something deeper stirred under the surface, not just vengeance or wounded pride, but something long starved, the fragile question of what came next. Aspen lifted his head, ears pricked. A sound carried on the wind, far off, hollow, like hooves on soft earth, then gone. The husky stood, paced, then returned to Micah's side, nudging his hand with a quiet whine. "I hear it too," Micah murmured. He went inside. Stella looked up, sensing it in his face. "What is it?" "Quiet," he said. "Too quiet." She rose, motioned to the girls. Wren obeyed without question, pulling Junie toward the back room. Stella stepped beside Micah, hand on her rifle. But no visitor came. No figure emerged from the trees. Hours passed, the tension thinning but not dissolving. By mid-afternoon, Wren stood in the yard with a shovel, determined to dig a place for the wildflowers she'd dried during winter. Stella joined her, sleeves rolled, hands deep in the soil. Micah watched them from the porch, arms crossed, a soft smile flickering across his mouth. "You ever think," Stella said, brushing dirt from her hands, "how strange it is, how survival teaches you to stop dreaming?" Micah didn't answer at first. "Sometimes it does," he said finally. "But sometimes survival teaches you which dreams are worth keeping." She looked at him. Her face was sun-touched now, stronger. There were still shadows in her eyes, but they were no longer empty. "I'm starting to think you might be one of mine," she said. And then Aspen barked. Not the warning bark of suspicion, nor the startled sound of prey. This was deeper, urgent, fearful. Micah turned toward the woods, every part of him alert. Stella ran for the girls, pulling them to the porch. Aspen bounded to the tree-lean, teeth bared. And from the brush emerged Jeb Hartley, bloodied, limping, rifle in hand. Alone, but wild-eyed, unsteady. He staggered into the clearing, the butt of his rifle dragging through the grass, his coat torn, face pale. Micah stepped forward, chest tight. "Jeb." The man didn't answer. He sank to his knees in the dirt. His mouth moved like he meant to speak, but no sound came. Stella approached slowly, rifle raised. "What happened?" Jeb's eyes lifted to hers. There was no malice in them now, only fear. "Ambush," he rasped. They followed me after I left. Said I owed 'em for pay. Wanted the deed. I told 'em I didn't have it. Told 'em you wouldn't give it up." He coughed, blood staining his teeth. "They're comin'. Not just for you. For all of it." Micah's jaw tightened. "How many?" "3. Maybe 4. One had a scar down his jaw, called himself Pike. Said they'd burn the whole place down if you didn't hand it over." Micah helped him to his feet, but there was no strength in Jeb anymore. His eyes rolled back, knees buckling. Stella caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. Her face showed no love, but no hatred either. "He's dying," she said quietly. "He chose his path," Micah answered. Still, they carried him inside. Laid him by the fire. Wren brought water. Junie stood behind her mother, clinging to her skirt. Jeb opened his eyes once more. "I didn't mean to not like this," he said. Stella knelt beside him. "I know." Then he was gone. The hush that followed was not silence, it was breath held. Micah moved quickly after that, checking the windows, loading weapons, gathering what little they had to defend themselves. "They'll come at night," he said. "They always do." Stella nodded. "We're not running." "No," he looked at her. "We're not." They moved as one. The girls were placed in the root cellar, blankets and water and food enough for a night. Aspen stayed above with Micah, pacing like he remembered war. Stella took position near the back window, eyes sharp. The sun set. The sky bruised into dusk. And then, footsteps. Faint, crunching, cautious. Micah's breath slowed. He raised the rifle. Waited. A figure stepped into the open. Tall. Scar down his jaw. Rifle slung low. Pike. Behind him, 3 more. One carried a torch. Micah fired first. The torch dropped. The figure with it crumpled. Chaos broke. The men scattered. Shots rang out. Sparks flew as bullets struck the porch. Stella returned fire, her aim calm, exact. One of the men screamed, fell. Micah moved to the other window. Pike charged forward, crouching behind the rain barrel. "Hand it over," he shouted, "or I burn this whole place." "This place isn't yours," Micah called back. Pike lit another torch. Threw it toward the barn. Flames burst. Aspen charged, teeth bared. Pike fired. Missed. Micah tackled him, the two falling into the dirt, grappling. The rifle skidded away. Micah slammed his fist into Pike's jaw. Once. Twice. Pike reached for his belt knife. Stella was there. She raised her rifle, pressed it to Pike's temple. He froze. "Drop it," she said. He obeyed. Micah rose, breathing hard. Blood on his lip. The third man had fled. The barn crackled, half burning. They let Pike live. Bound him, dragged him to a post. Watched the flames die to embers. When the sun rose, the land was singed but still theirs. Stella held Wren and Junie in her arms. Micah stood nearby, Aspen at his side, eyes on the road that now led to safety. The cabin stood. The girls were whole. And something deeper, something that had been building between them like spring under snow, finally bloomed. That evening, Stella found Micah by the lake, where thaw had opened the surface to reflect sky. She stood beside him, silent. "I never thought I'd see another spring," he said. She took his hand. "You were always meant to." He turned to her. "I want to stay," she said. "If you'll have us." "I've been waiting for you," he said, "since I was a boy in an alley." She kissed him then, not desperate, not fearful, just certain. And the lake whispered. The woods hushed. Aspen lay down at their feet. In the distance, smoke curled upward, not ruin, but warmth. And for the first time in a long, long while, Micah Callan chose something. Not solitude, not silence, but love. And it held.
The desert did not speak, it breathed. Slow, dry exhales across the cracked earth. The sky above held no mercy, just an endless stretch of pale heat, broken only by the shimmering illusion of water far on the horizon. Beneath that cruel sun, a woman walked with no clear direction, her shadow trailing behind her like a ghost too tired to cling. Angelina May's dress, once pale blue and ribboned at the sleeves, now hung in tatters. The hem, soaked in dust and blood, flapped against her calves with every dragging step. Her hair, honey blonde and once pinned with care, clung in sweaty strands to her cheeks. Her arms wrapped tightly around a small cloth bundle, swaddled gently, as if it might still breathe. She had wrapped the child herself. No one else would touch her. Her boots were long gone, taken by the old man before he turned her out. "You won't need 'em in hell," he muttered, tossing a cracked canteen at her feet like a bone to a stray dog. "Walk until you're forgiven." Angelina didn't cry. Not when they laid her baby in the ground without a word. Not when the door slammed shut behind her. Grief had hardened into something beyond tears, an ache that pulsed in her ribs, deeper than marrow. She couldn't even remember how far she'd come now. The days blurred into one long hallucination of sky and sand. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the child's face. Hope, she had named her. Pale as milk, too still. A feather that never took flight. The midwife had refused to enter the room. Said it was a curse, that Angelina must have angered God. Her mother-in-law whispered prayers under her breath and wouldn't meet Angelina's eyes. The preacher stood in the doorway, but did not step inside. The silence was heavier than mourning. It was condemnation. They buried the baby behind the shed near the dry well. No headstone, no hymns. Angelina tried to sing one herself, but her voice cracked like old wood. And when she'd lain down beside the grave, forehead pressed to the soil, she heard nothing, not even her own heartbeat. The wind picked up now, whistling through the arroyos like the wailing of women left behind. Angelina stumbled, knees hitting rock. She clutched the bundle tighter. Her lips had split from thirst. The canteen was empty. Her hands shook as she tried to sit, but the desert was wide and unkind, and the sun no longer warmed. It seared. She spotted a crooked stump ahead, gray and half buried in sand. It looked like a dead man's hand reaching from the earth. Angelina crawled toward it. Each movement pulled fire through her limbs. When she reached it, she curled into its meager shadow and pressed the bundle to her chest. Her thoughts drifted in slow circles. She remembered the first time she'd met her husband. Eli Thompson had been a tall man, with a strong jaw and hands always busy with work. She thought him kind. He'd offered her a ride in his wagon when she was walking alone from the sewing shop. But kindness, it turned out, was thin in him, thin like ice before cracks. He loved what she could provide, a quiet house, warm bread, the promise of sons. Not her laughter, not her mind, not the way she cradled wildflowers as if they could talk back. When the baby didn't make it, he didn't even look at her. He sat on the porch, staring at the dust road like salvation might roll down it in a cloud of horses. She asked him if he'd hold her. He said, "Don't burden me with that sadness." So she stopped asking. The wind softened. Shadows lengthened. Angelina's eyelids fluttered. Somewhere a hawk cried. Her breath grew shallow. She felt it then, a presence. It wasn't sound or movement, just a shift in the air. Like the space beside her no longer belonged to the wind alone. She forced her eyes open and looked toward the rocks. At first, nothing. Then a figure. Still. Watching. She could barely see through the dust and haze, but it wasn't a mirage. Someone stood a little ways off. A man, perhaps. Rough outline. Wide-brimmed hat. Not moving toward her. Just watching, as if uncertain whether she was still a woman or something already gone. Her fingers clenched around the bundle. If he was here to rob her, he'd find nothing but sorrow. Angelina's voice caught in her throat, dry as gravel. She didn't call out. Didn't dare. Pride, even in ruin, held her tongue. The figure stepped back, vanishing behind a rock. Gone. The desert grew silent again. Angelina laid her head against the tree stump and closed her eyes. Let it come. The sand, the wind, the forgetting. Let it all come. But it didn't. She awoke to darkness, cool and quiet. The stars blinked above like scattered embers. Something had changed. The wind no longer burned, it kissed. She blinked slowly, not understanding at first. A blanket covered her shoulders. She reached up, disoriented. It was wool, coarse but warm. She looked down. The bundle was still there, nestled safe in her arms. Next to it, tucked gently into the crook of her elbow, was a tin cup of water. Not much. A few swallows. But she drank like it was the blood of life itself. Tears sprang to her eyes, not for the kindness, but for the knowledge that someone had seen her suffering and chosen not to walk away. Who? Why? She tried to sit, pain stitching through her spine. Then movement again. From the rocks, the man returned, but closer now. She could see his shape more clearly. Broad shoulders, slow gait, a limp, perhaps, or just careful steps. He didn't approach her directly. Instead, he moved toward a pack mule tethered beneath a crooked juniper. He said nothing, didn't even glance at her, just built a small fire with practiced hands, set a pot to boil. His movements were slow, deliberate, not afraid, not brash, just respectful, as if he were near something holy. Angelina watched, breath caught. Every instinct told her to stay still, observe. He wasn't a rescuer, not the kind who swooped in with deangelinations and pity. He was something else, something quieter. After some time, he poured a bit of stew into a tin bowl and set it near the fire. He didn't offer it directly to her, nor did he speak. He simply stepped back, sat near the mule, and leaned against his saddlebag. She waited. Minutes passed. Eventually, drawn by scent and need, Angelina moved, inch by inch, to the bowl. She held the bundle close with one arm while spooning the stew with the other. Each bite tasted of something she hadn't felt in days. Warmth. When she looked up, the man was asleep. Just like that. No demands. No questions. The fire cracked gently, casting soft shadows over his weathered face. He looked like someone who'd carried loss too, but differently. Not in loud grief. In silence. Angelina wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. Her fingers brushed the cloth bundle. She leaned back against the stump, eyes wet, soul aching but alive. And for the first time since the stillness took her child, Angelina did not feel alone. The desert watched and waited. The cabin crouched low against the land like it didn't want to be seen. A plain thing of hand-hewn logs and sun-bleached planks. Its roof sagged in the middle, as if time had pressed down on it too long. The chimney puffed thin smoke into the early light, a breath of warmth in a world mostly cold. Wind scraped against the shutters, and somewhere nearby a mule chewed methodically at dry grass, oblivious to the heaviness that lived inside those walls. Inside, Johnson Boone stirred a pot of stew he wouldn't taste. He hadn't eaten more than what was necessary for weeks. Hunger came and went like weather. What remained was habit, routine carved by grief and repetition. He wore his sorrow like an old coat, the kind that fits, so well you forget it's there until someone tries to take it from you. The cabin bore no sound of laughter. Hadn't for years. A woman lay still on the bed in the corner, wrapped in a wool blanket, her cheek pressed to the pillow, as if she might burrow into it and disappear. Johnson had found her in the desert 2 days earlier, curled beneath the dead stump by the watering hole, her skin blistered and cracked from sun. He hadn't planned on bringing her back. He hadn't planned anything. But something in her silence had matched his own, and that felt like reason enough. She hadn't spoken yet. Not even once. Johnson didn't ask her name. Not because he didn't care, but because names came with expectations. He simply offered water, then food, then space. He made her a nest of quilts in the bed once belonging to Miriam, and watched from across the room as she drifted in and out of sleep. He didn't question the small cloth bundle she held so tightly. Some things didn't need asking. On the third morning, she stirred. Johnson, whittling wood by the hearth, heard the shift of breath and fabric. He turned his head slowly, careful not to make her feel cornered. Her eyes opened, bloodshot, rimmed with purple shadows. She looked at the ceiling first, then the walls. Her fingers clutched the bundle even in waking. She didn't speak, just turned her face toward the wall and closed her eyes again. Johnson didn't interrupt her silence. He remembered his own, how people's words came like hail, loud and useless, after Miriam died. So instead, he left a cup of warm water and a small tin plate of bread near the bed. Then he stepped outside. The morning air bit his skin with that dry chill that only came in the west, when night hadn't quite let go. He rubbed his calloused hands together and walked to where Francis, the mule, stood dozing in the shade. The animal flicked his ears, but didn't move. Johnson touched the mule's flank gently, a gesture born from habit more than affection. Francis had been Tommy's pet once. The boy used to feed him corn husks from the back porch. Now the mule ate alone, like the rest of them. Johnson returned inside to find the water drunk and the bread gone. The woman lay still again, bundle cradled like a child. He sat near the hearth and resumed carving, an old habit, though most of his figures never got finished. He didn't look at her as he worked. Just let the silence stretch between them like a thread neither of them dared pull. Days passed like that. She would wake, eat in silence, rest. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks. The fever broke. The tremble in her hands eased. And still, she said nothing. Johnson noticed things instead. How she folded her blanket with deliberate care. How she moved through the cabin like someone who didn't want to take up space. She swept the floor one morning with the old broom, unasked. Another time, he found the firewood stacked neatly where before it had been scattered. He let her. Words came, not through conversation, but through action. She began mending a ripped curtain. Boiled water for dishes. On the 5th day, she swept ashes from the hearth and looked over at him. Lips parted. But no words yet. He nodded to her. She nodded back. That was the first conversation. Later that evening, he poured 2 cups of coffee and offered one by holding it out and waiting. She took it slowly. Their hands brushed. She did not flinch. They sat on the porch, side by side, with a respectful emptiness between them. Johnson didn't look at her directly. The sky was enough to fill the space, clouds curling like smoke trails, the sun slipping gold behind the hills. She sipped slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind tugged at her hair. When she finished, she set the cup down gently, her fingers trailing the rim once. Then she stood and went inside. That night, Johnson watched her from the doorway. She curled in the bed, the bundle still tight against her chest. In sleep, her brow furrowed, and once she whispered something, too soft to catch. Johnson turned away. He dreamed of Miriam. Not her face, but her hands. They were planting tomatoes. She was laughing. The sound didn't stay with him, but the feel of it did. The next morning, as the kettle boiled, the woman spoke. "My name's Angelina." Johnson didn't startle. He just nodded once, poured coffee into 2 cups, and handed her one. "Johnson," he said. She nodded back. Nothing more was said. But the room felt different. Not warm, not yet, but less hollow. The hours unfolded in their usual rhythm. He chopped wood. She cleaned the wash basin. He fed Francis. She patched the hole in the curtain's hem. Their quiet companionship grew roots. One afternoon, Johnson caught her outside, kneeling in the hard-packed dirt beside the porch. She was digging with a wooden spoon, gently turning soil. When he approached, she glanced up, sheepish. "I thought maybe rosemary might grow here," she said. He blinked, then nodded. "Worth a try." She smiled, faint and fleeting. In that smile, he saw something that ached, something like sunlight breaking through a boarded window. Later that night, she asked him where he'd learned to carve. "Started with my boy," Johnson said, voice low. He liked horses. Made him a little one for his 6th birthday. Angelina's gaze dropped to the figure on the mantel, a rough carving of a foal, legs too long, neck arched proudly. "Where's he now?" she asked. "Gone. 2 winters ago. Illness took 'em both." Her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I'm sorry." He looked down. "Me too." A long silence passed. The fire crackled. Outside, the mule brayed softly. She said, "My little girl never even breathed." Johnson raised his eyes. Angelina's voice didn't waver, but her fingers tightened around the cloth bundle that never left her arms. "I named her Hope," she said, even though I knew they wouldn't let me keep her name. Not even her name." Johnson said nothing, but his gaze held hers. Steady, not probing, just there. Angelina exhaled, a shaky breath, but freer. "They buried her while I was bleeding," she whispered. "Didn't even let me hold her long. Said it was better I forget. Said God took her as punishment, that I'd brought shame." She stopped speaking. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "My husband never looked at her," she added. "Didn't want to." Johnson rose, walked to the hearth, and returned with something in his hand. A small wooden box, carved and sanded smooth. He opened it carefully, revealing a bundle of dried wildflowers and a pale ribbon. "Miriam's," he said softly. "She kept these from our boy's christening." Angelina touched the edge of the box, reverent. "Would you like to keep it?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. Johnson closed the box and placed it gently beside her. The firelight painted gold across their faces. Outside, night settled slow and heavy. Neither of them said thank you. The moment didn't ask for it. Later that week, Angelina began hanging herbs in the window. Thyme, sage, dried lavender. The scent filled the cabin, mixing with old wood and smoke. Johnson repaired the loose board on the porch. She planted rosemary in the patch of soil he cleared. Still, they didn't speak often, but when they did, it came gently, like spring rain after a long drought. One night, a storm rolled through, thunder low and steady. Angelina stirred, rising from bed with a bundle in her arms. She stood at the window, watching the sky. Johnson lit a lamp and stood beside her. She didn't flinch when his hand touched her shoulder. "They said I was cursed," she whispered. "But you gave me a blanket." He didn't respond. Just let the silence hold her words. "I was ready to die," she said. "And then someone made soup and let me sleep." Johnson turned to her then, not with pity, but recognition. "I didn't know what else to do," he said, "but I knew not to leave you out there." She nodded. Outside, lightning danced on the ridgeline. Inside, something lighter than grief, but heavier than hope, filled the space between them. When she returned to bed, she laid the bundle beside her, but this time, her hands rested freely at her sides. And for the first night, Angelina slept without weeping. Johnson sat by the hearth, carving a new figure. Not a horse, not a mule, a cradle. Small, rough in shape, but cradling nothing yet. The storm passed by dawn, and with it, something else. The stillness in the cabin no longer felt like absence. It felt like waiting for something not yet spoken, but nearing. The sun rose with a hush of a breath held long, spilling warm light through the cabin's crooked slats. Inside, the stillness had changed shape. Not the old, hollow silence of grief that clung to every timber like dust, but something softer. The quiet of things beginning, not yet blooming, but stirred. Angelina sat near the window, her hands in her lap, a basket of dried herbs beside her. She was plucking lavender heads with a kind of gentle precision that only came from loss. People who had known absence treated beauty like something that could vanish without warning. She set each purple tuft aside carefully, as if placing memory in a drawer. Johnson moved with slow purpose across the cabin, oiling the hinge on the old door. He'd lived in that house nearly 15 years and never thought to fix that particular creak until now. Not until Angelina had begun opening it each morning, stepping outside with bare feet and soft resolve, as if reclaiming pieces of herself from the soil. Their words came now in soft exchanges, but never too many. They weren't ready for that kind of talk yet. Instead, they filled the space with presence. "You always keep lavender in your tea?" Johnson asked as he tested the hinge again. Angelina looked up from the bundle. "I didn't used to." She paused, plucked another bloom. "My mother did. When I was little. I forgot until I smelled it again." Johnson nodded. "Smells like peace." Angelina smiled faintly. Peace with a little ache behind it. He liked how she spoke, plain, but not simple. Like someone who'd peeled back enough layers of herself to find what mattered and discarded the rest. Angelina had stopped holding the cloth bundle at night. It now sat folded in her chest at the foot of the bed, wrapped with a ribbon Johnson had offered for Miriam's sewing tin. Angelina hadn't unwrapped it, hadn't dared to look inside. Not yet. But the act of setting it down had changed something in her gait. She no longer walked like someone guarding a wound. She walked like someone preparing to heal. One afternoon, Johnson found her in the corner near the hearth, washing the floor with a cloth and a bowl of warm water. "You don't have to do all that," he said gently. "I know," she replied, wringing out the cloth. "But I want to." He watched her a moment, unsure why the sight struck him so deeply. "That floor never looked cleaner when I was doing it," he said with a dry smile. She returned the smile, brief but genuine. The garden Angelina had started was sprouting, tiny shoots of green in a world still colored by loss. Rosemary and sage had pushed up from the stubborn soil. Johnson caught her one morning just standing over it, hands on her hips, lips parted like she might speak to the plants. He stepped beside her. "You're good with stubborn things. Maybe because I'm one of them." A soft laugh between them. Then silence again, the comfortable kind. But not everything outside the cabin had softened. One evening, while trading at the general store in the nearby town, Johnson returned with a furrow in his brow. He unloaded the supplies quietly, glancing toward Angelina once, then again, before finally speaking. "Ran into the preacher," he said, voice low. Angelina stiffened slightly, her hand stilling on the flour sack she was sorting. "He asked if you were still here. Said some folks been talking." She didn't ask what they'd been saying. She already knew. "I told him it's none of their business," Johnson added. "That it ain't for them to judge who's welcome in my home." Angelina looked down at the sack again, smoothing it with her palm. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Johnson said softly. "I did." She turned her head then, eyes finding his. They didn't shine with fear or shame, but something quieter. Gratitude with a thread of sorrow. It was not just that he had stood up for her. It was that someone had. "I don't want to cause trouble for you," she said. "You didn't," he replied. "They bring their own trouble." Later, by firelight, Angelina sat beside him, her fingers working at a piece of cloth she'd started turning into a curtain. The shadows danced across their faces. "I keep thinking about her," she said after a long silence. Johnson didn't need to ask who. "I used to imagine her laughing," she continued. "Before she was born, I thought maybe she'd have my eyes, or my mother's voice." Her hands trembled slightly, then stilled. "Now I wonder if she would have liked lavender in her tea." Johnson nodded. "I think she would have. Just to be near you." Tears didn't fall then, but they filled her voice. "She didn't get to live, Johnson. Not even a breath." He turned toward her slowly. "But she's still here." Angelina looked at him. "In your voice. In the way you sit with the garden. In how you make things clean and good again." He paused. "Some things don't need breath to leave something behind." She covered her mouth then, as if to keep the sob from escaping. But it came anyway. Soft, broken, real. Johnson didn't touch her. He didn't move closer. He simply stayed, his presence solid as the ground beneath her. And that was what she needed. In the days that followed, she spoke more often. She told him about her girlhood near a river, where she used to catch minnows in her apron. About her first horse. The way her father used to laugh with his whole chest. And slowly about the man she married. He wanted a wife, not a person, she said one morning as they shelled peas. When I lost the baby, I think it was just one more thing I'd failed to give him. You didn't fail, Johnson said. She met his eyes. I know that now. Then softer. But I didn't then. Johnson told her about Miriam, not much, but enough. How she used to sing while stirring stew. How she once stayed up 3 nights nursing Tommy through fever, whispering stories into his dreams. He didn't speak of the deathbed or the winter it happened, only of the way they'd lived. That's what Angelina listened to. The life between. There was no romance in their silence. No rush to claim each other. Just something growing. Something steady. They walked together sometimes, to the creek where Johnson set traps. Angelina picked wildflowers. He built a bench beneath the tree that shaded her favorite spot. She brought him dried fruit from town when she went in with him. The people there still whispered. They stared. But Johnson never left her side. And when someone muttered unholy, Angelina looked straight at them and smiled, a small, steady smile that said she was not ashamed to have survived. One evening, the clouds rolled heavy, the air ripe with rain. Johnson covered the firewood, while Angelina gathered the herbs from the drying rack. As the first drops hit the roof, they stood in the doorway and watched the storm arrive. I used to hate storms, she said. Still do, he asked. No, she tilted her face into the wind. They make things grow. He looked at her then, not just glanced, but really saw her. You've changed this place, he said. She turned her head, eyes searching his. I think it changed me first. That night, thunder cracked through the sky, like a wound tearing open. They lay in their separate corners of the cabin, each listening to the rain, their thoughts deep as roots. And something shifted. Neither reached for the other, but in the silence, they knew. Whatever had begun between them was no longer a kindness out of duty. It was something chosen, something mutual, something earned. The next morning, when the sun rose, it found Angelina kneeling by the garden. She cupped the sprouting rosemary gently, brushing soil from the base with reverence. Johnson watched from the porch, a mug in his hand. She stood and looked over at him. Would you help me build a fence around it? She asked. He smiled, slow and quiet. Of course. They built it together, wooden posts, twine, and time. The fence wasn't perfect. A little crooked in spots. But it stood. And when it was finished, Angelina stepped back, hands on her hips, and nodded. That'll do. Johnson wiped sweat from his brow. Looks like a garden that plans to stay. She looked at him, her gaze clear. I think I do too. Inside the cabin, the cloth bundle still sat folded with care. But it no longer held all her sorrow. That weight had spread now, into the herbs drying above the hearth, into the fence enclosing new life, into the hush between her and the man who never asked for her past, but built space for her future. And in that space, Angelina began to grow. Dust settled on the horizon like old regret. The road ran straight and hard across the plains, a spine of dry earth and hoofprints. Midday heat shimmered in waves, distorting shapes and turning even the kind into mirages. But Johnson Boone, sharpening a scythe outside the cabin, didn't mistake what he saw. A rider. Alone. Coming slow, but with a purpose that made the birds lift off the fence post and scatter into the sky. Inside, Angelina was kneading bread, sleeves rolled up, cheeks pink from sun and warmth. She hummed a low tune, nothing distinct, just the sort of sound that keeps silence from settling too heavy in a space. The cabin, though still weathered, no longer looked forlorn. Curtains swayed at the windows. Fresh rosemary hung above the hearth. The floor shone from her constant tending. But Johnson had learned that peace had a fragile echo. One step, one word, and it could splinter. He didn't call out to her. He wiped the blade clean, leaned it against the wall, and stepped forward, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. The rider came into view with clarity then, a man thick at the shoulders, clothes clean but dust-worn, face tight with the certainty of judgment. Johnson didn't need the man's name to feel the weight of him. It was Angelina's father-in-law, the same man who'd thrown her to the desert like she was a burden the Lord himself had refused to carry. The rider dismounted with the slow drama of someone who believed the land owed him deference. He didn't smile, didn't offer greeting, just tipped his hat in a gesture empty of kindness and filled with habit. Johnson stood tall. "You've come a long way." The man's gaze swept over the porch, the curtains, the blooming garden fenced in by hand. Then to the door, open enough for the scent of bread to waft out. "She's here," he said, as if that was offense enough. Johnson didn't confirm. He didn't need to. Silence between men who stood their ground said more than any admission. "She was spoken for," the man said, voice even. "Wife to my son. She left without release." "She was cast out," Johnson replied, quiet steel in his tone. The man's eyes darkened. "That ain't for you to decide." "I didn't decide anything," Johnson said. "I found her half dead beneath the sky. What came after she chose." The man took a step closer, squinting. "You been lying with her?" Johnson didn't answer. He didn't flinch. The truth was between them like a drawn gun. Angelina appeared then, silent as shadow, hands still dusted with flour. Her hair was pulled back, face unreadable. She didn't look at Johnson. She looked only at the man who once called her family. "Go home," she said, voice steady. Her father-in-law turned to her, mouth tightening. "You still carrying that child around like a martyr?" She said nothing. He snorted. "You know what people say, that you cursed the house. That's why you got cast out." Angelina didn't blink. "I didn't curse it. You did. You buried her without her name." He scoffed. "I buried shame. That's what I buried." The words struck like fists, but Angelina didn't flinch. She stepped forward into the sunlight, her hands loose at her sides. "You buried my child," she said, voice like a blade. "And then you tried to bury me." The man's mouth opened, but Johnson stepped in, his body a wall between them now. "She's not yours to shame anymore," he said. "She's still married in the eyes of the Lord. She's free in the eyes of anyone who's looked at her and seen the truth." The man hesitated, eyes flicking between them. Not fear, not yet, but calculation. "I'll speak with the preacher," he said finally. "She'll answer for what she's done." "She already has," Angelina said. "You just weren't there to see it." He mounted his horse with more rust than grace. His last words came over his shoulder like grit in the wind. "You think that cabin'll protect you when tongues start wagging?" Johnson didn't answer. They watched him ride away until the road swallowed him. Inside, the air was thick. Johnson stood by the hearth, not looking at her. Angelina leaned against the table, arms crossed, the tremble in her fingers betraying the calm in her face. "I didn't want you to see him," she said. "I needed to," he replied. "I was going to leave," she murmured, "before he could come." Johnson looked at her then. "Why?" She shook her head. "I don't want your life to get smaller because of me. I don't want whispers to ruin what's growing here." Johnson crossed the room in 3 quiet steps and placed his hands on the edge of the table, close enough to feel her breath. "Let them whisper," he said. "I've lived a long time with silence. I can live with noise too, if it means you stay." Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with the strain of being believed. Outside, wind swept over the garden fence, rustling the herbs like a hymn. But the town wasn't silent. By the week's end, the general store had raised prices on Johnson. The butcher wouldn't sell to Angelina. The blacksmith who once tipped his hat now looked through her as if she were smoke. Angelina bore it with grace. Johnson with quiet fury. In the evenings, she swept the porch while he sat beside the fire carving a new cradle, his hands working slow and sure. It was not a gift, not a plan, just a shape that felt like hope made real. One morning, Angelina rose early and washed her face with cold water from the basin. She pinned her hair back, tied her shawl close, and stepped into the yard. "I'm going to town," she said. Johnson looked up from splitting kindling. Alone. She nodded. I won't be long. He didn't argue. In the chapel, the preacher's eyes widened when she entered. Angelina's boots echoed on the stone floor. Sunlight fell through the windows like judgment, but she didn't flinch. I won't be made into a warning, she said. The preacher opened his mouth. I know what they say, that I lost my baby because of sin, that I live with a man outside vows, that I broke something holy. He said her name, low, but she held up a hand. I buried a child with no prayer, was cast out by kin, survived alone in the dirt, and I rose. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. If you want to tell folks I'm cursed, do it. But let them also say this, I didn't die. I didn't curse them back. I just planted something. The preacher didn't reply. She turned, walked back into the morning. At home, she found Johnson fixing the porch rail. She stepped up beside him and held out a bundle of rosemary. For the window, she said. That evening, someone knocked at the door. A woman stood there, widowed, plain-faced, kind-eyed. In her hands, a basket of seeds. Figured maybe you'd have more room for growing, she said. Behind her, the blacksmith lingered. I heard you needed help with that cradle wood, he offered. Angelina blinked, then stepped aside. Come in. By the time night settled over the land, the cabin had more voices inside than it had heard in years. Later, when it was quiet again, Johnson stepped onto the porch and found Angelina watching the stars. She didn't turn when he approached, but she leaned ever so slightly into his shoulder when he stood beside her. You scared me, he said softly. I needed to face it, she replied, so it wouldn't follow me anymore. They stood like that a long time, saying nothing. And, in the hush, the desert held its breath. Something had shifted, not just in the world beyond, but in them. It was not over, but it had begun. Smoke thickened the dawn before the rooster crowed. At first, Johnson thought it was fog, something rare and uninvited. But the air tasted wrong, like ash and pine sap. He stepped onto the porch barefoot, the wood warm beneath him, and scanned the horizon with narrowing eyes. The barn was burning. The flames licked the roof like hungry mouths, curling upward in orange ribbons that snapped and hissed. Firelight pulsed through the gaps between boards, shadows flickering wild across the field. The mule screamed, a sharp, panic cry that split the morning hush in two. Johnson ran. Angelina was already out the door behind him, boots unlaced, her shawl trailing like a flag in retreat. Her face was pale, eyes wide, but not frozen. She moved fast, grabbing the water bucket and sprinting to the well. Johnson threw open the barn door with a crash that sent sparks spiraling. Heat shoved into his face like a fist. Francis, he called. The mule kicked and bucked, trapped by his own tether. Smoke clouded everything. The air inside was thick, heavy, angry. Johnson lunged forward, coughing, eyes stinging. He yanked the knot free and slapped the mule's flank hard. Go. Francis bolted into the yard, hooves thudding like war drums. Angelina rushed to catch his rope, guiding him away from the blaze. Johnson stumbled back into daylight, hands blackened, shirt scorched at the sleeve. He turned just in time to see the roof begin to sag. The barn collapsed in on itself, a roaring surrender of timber and years. Sparks scattered into the garden, hissing against the damp soil. Johnson grabbed another bucket. Angelina met him at the well. They worked side by side, wordless, soaked to the bone in sweat and smoke. By the time the fire died to embers, dawn had broken wide and raw across the sky. The barn was gone. Only charred bones remained, rafters like ribs, blackened earth beneath. Angelina sat on the porch steps, coughing into a cloth. Johnson knelt beside her, cradling his burned hands against his chest. Someone did this, she said, her voice rough. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was a weight between them. They sat in silence, soot-streaked and shivering, until the sun climbed higher and made their losses plain. The garden, by some grace, had been spared. The fence scorched but standing. The herbs wilted, but alive. When Angelina stood, she didn't look back at the ashes. She walked into the cabin, fetched a fresh basin of water, and began cleaning Johnson's hands. He flinched when the cloth touched his palm. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's all right. You should rest. Later." She paused, then asked, "You think it was him?" Johnson didn't answer right away. He couldn't handle being ignored, he said finally, or forgiven. The townsfolk had grown quiet again, not with shame, but avoidance. Kindness had bloomed in brief gestures after Angelina's return from the chapel. But now, fear crept in with the smell of smoke. Still, Angelina didn't hide. That same afternoon, she walked into town, hands still stained with soot, hair pulled back tight. People watched her. She didn't stop. At the sheriff's office, she laid her palms on the desk and said, "I want it known that someone burned our barn." The sheriff, a worn man with eyes too tired for suspicion, nodded slowly. "You think it was your husband's kin?" Angelina didn't correct him. That word, husband, was already ash. "I think it was someone who thought I'd keep quiet," she said. The sheriff promised to look into it. Angelina didn't expect he'd try. Back at the cabin, Johnson had begun clearing what remained. Charcoal-stained wood, rusted nails, the twisted iron ring of the mule's feed bucket. He moved slowly, hands bandaged in torn cloth, jaw set. She joined him without a word. Together, they stripped the wreck down to bones. Angelina's arms shook with each swing of the axe, but she didn't stop. Not until the sun bled into the sky and the air cooled enough to breathe. That night, Johnson sat by the fire with a mug of cooled coffee, his eyes distant. Angelina poured herself a cup and joined him. "I dreamed of her again," she said after a long silence. Johnson looked up. She was running, Angelina whispered, through tall grass, laughing. "I couldn't catch her." "She's not running from you," he said gently. "She's showing you the way." Angelina's throat tightened. "She never even cried," she murmured. Johnson leaned forward. "But you did, and you still do. That's part of loving her." Angelina's hand found his. Their fingers curled together slowly, carefully, like roots seeking soil. "I want to rebuild," she said. "I already started drawing the plans." She smiled then, small, tired, real. The next days were spent hauling lumber, measuring earth, redrawing what had been lost. The townsfolk watched but didn't interfere. No one came to help. But one morning, a knock echoed on the cabin door. A girl, no more than 16, stood there, eyes shy. "My ma sent these," she said, holding out a loaf of bread and a bundle of nails. "Said it ain't right what happened." Angelina took them with a nod. Behind the girl stood her mother, waiting with a set jaw and moist eyes. Johnson and Angelina rebuilt the barn beam by beam, each nail driven in with blistered hands and grim resolve. The days were hard, but not hopeless. Their shared silences no longer felt like voids, but like soil, dark and rich with something new. On a clear afternoon, Angelina stood at the edge of the garden, planting marigolds where the old path had burned. Her hands dug deep into the ash-blackened soil, turning it over, coaxing life from death. Johnson approached, watching her. "You're planting flowers?" "They keep the beetles out," she said, not looking up. He smiled. "They'll bloom bright." "Some things should," she replied. After fire. That night, Angelina unfolded the cloth bundle for the first time. She sat alone by the hearth, hands trembling. Inside was a tiny bonnet, yellowed with time, no bigger than a teacup. A lace ribbon, one booty. She held each piece like sacred things. Johnson found her there, and when she looked up, he didn't ask questions. He just sat down beside her and held her hand. "She had a name," Angelina whispered. "Her name was Hope. I know. I want to bury her right. With words. We will." The next morning, they walked to the far side of the garden. Johnson had carved a small wooden cross. Angelina carried a handful of rosemary and the little bundle, wrapped soft in linen. They dug together. Not deep. Just enough. Angelina laid the cloth down with care. Then she knelt and whispered. She was mine, and she mattered. Johnson set the cross in the earth. Angelina placed the rosemary. Then she sat back on her heels, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. Johnson didn't speak, but when she stood, she looked lighter, not healed, but not broken. They walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, the sky bright above them. That evening, thunder rolled again. Far off. A summer promise. Johnson stood on the porch, staring into the distance. Angelina joined him, brushing flour from her apron. "You think it's coming our way?" He looked up. "Could be. Storms don't ask permission." She smiled faintly. "Neither do wildflowers." They watched the sky darken. The wind lifted her hair. He turned to her. "Angelina," he said. She faced him fully, eyes wide, waiting. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because you need shelter. Not because I owe you kindness. But because this place, this life, it's not whole without you." She didn't speak right away. But then she took his face in her hands. "I've already stayed," she whispered. "Now I choose to stay." He kissed her then. Not like fire. Like bloom. Slow, certain, tender. When they pulled apart, the wind picked up. Rain began to fall, soft as blessing. Inside, the cradle Johnson had carved sat in the corner, empty but waiting. Outside, marigolds swayed in ash-fed soil. And under the low, storm-washed sky, two people stood side by side, no longer just survivors, but something stronger. Something rooted. Something rising.